Well, hello everyone out there in quarantine. Hopefully you're all staying home and staying safe. And if you're bored enough to watch this, well, I hope you enjoy my look at Eisenhower and Kennedy. Going to try and keep this as narrow as possible. I'm sure that this video is going to get flagged for copyright on YouTube, so if there's stuff missing, that's why. I will link many YouTube videos outside this, things I would just show in class that, well, I guess I can't just include in my work because someone else owns it. That's how copyright works. So we'll deal with that as best as possible. Those videos are as much notes as this. So if you're taking notes, I would include them just the same. Some videos better than others. Some are primary sources. But hey, the Iron Curtain speech with Churchill got flagged of all things. So I'm just going to assume it's going to happen. Anyways. With school no longer happening in person this year, I'm going to have to readjust and figure out what I'm going to do with certain things that I just expected I'd do when we get back. Well, we're not getting back, so we're going to have to adjust and deal with me as best you can. Of course, all of this is still optional, though I highly recommend it for the AP exam. But it is up to you. And when we get to required stuff, well, we'll figure that out when I know what I'm allowed to do. So it starts with modern campaign ads and Dwight Eisenhower. Ike is really the first, or the last, I should say, truly beloved president. Even by the end of his second term, that wasn't so true. We'll explore why. But the first real campaign ads come out under Ike.
Ike for president, Ike for president, Ike for president, Ike for president. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum, we'll take Ike to Washington. We don't want John
or Dean
or Harry, let's do that big job right. Let's get in step with the guy that's hep, get in step with Ike. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum, we'll take Ike to Washington.
That continues on for another like 3 minutes, so you're welcome. Did you also notice Harry Truman as the Democratic donkey there? Excellent subtlety. I like Ike becomes it's up there with Tippecanoe and Tyler too as far as iconic. This is the first modern campaign ad using television, and highly recommended. So, President Dwight Eisenhower, nicknamed Ike, actually there's no real reason for Ike to be a nickname of Dwight. It is because of Ike Eisenhower. He just went by Ike. Allied commander in World War II. He commands NATO. After that, he is a moderate Republican who goes for 2 terms. Being as simple as possible, because this is the whole point of everything. At home, he is hesitant to rebuke Joe McCarthy on his anti-communist raids. He is also hesitant to be very enthusiastic on civil rights. But when it comes to sending the army into Little Rock for the Little Rock Nine, which is a whole different lesson, he is all about doing that for desegregation. So at home, mixed bag, more or less likes to be non-interventionalist. Abroad, the domino theory comes into effect, NSC 68 and all that. If one country falls to communism, more and more will fall to communism. This is the next step of containment, where, okay, so the first they're like, well, there's certain important countries that can't fall. And then they're like, well, if this little country falls, and then this little country next to it falls, and this little country next to it falls, it'll get to be much more important to hit that big country. So no one can be allowed to fall to communism because it'll start a chain reaction. And where this mostly takes place is Vietnam. Vietnam starts as a French Indochina. They are fighting for their independence against France. We support France in this, and then as communists are pushing for revolution, we eventually begin supporting South Vietnam, which is the capitalist version. When Viet Minh guerrillas of the North Vietnamese take Dien Bien Phu, and I know I'm mispronouncing all of this, and I apologize. The Geneva Conference in 1954 sets up a split Vietnam, much like we saw a split Korea. Ho Chi Minh agrees to a division at the 17th parallel. South Vietnam is a pro-Western government. We put between 750 and 1,000 U.S. military advisors, there's a key term, to stay in South Vietnam. And we continue to pump aid into South Vietnam so that it cannot fall to communism because of the domino theory, and you definitely should keep that one in mind. But let's shift away from geopolitics for a bit to talk about culture, what's happening in America. And after all, the AP exam is so much more about domestic issues. So people are returning home from war. People want normalcy. They want the American dream. These are people who survived the Depression. They fought fascism and won. That we all deserve what America promises. And the biggest way this is done is the GI Bill. And this might be something that is still benefiting many of you and your parents, because this is one of the best things we've done in the 20th century. I mean, really and truly, this is something that should have been done all along. This is something we should celebrate. There's really no back end problem in this that I know of. So just explain the name. GI means government issue, which is why you get GI Joes. They were average Joes. Everything is government issues. Weapons, equipment, to GI socks. And so the people begin called GI Joes. That you are all, you refuse your individualism. You are all government issue, just the same as everything else. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's a bit macabre and giving up one's identity. But that's kind of the dark joke that makes the military go round. And so the GI Bill refers to government issue for these individuals. The GI Bill gives money for education, guaranteed and cheap loans for starting businesses. This initially starts just for veterans. Now it applies to veterans and their families. And there are many people who went into the military so that they can use the GI Bill to help their families, their wives, their children, make a better life for everyone. The GI Bill is something that is truly fantastic and a good thank you for our veterans that really we ought to do more of. We also see prefab housing in the 1950s. If you go to small cities throughout the country, you will still see plenty of houses where you drive by and you're like, they all look pretty much the same. Yeah, they were probably all built from the same template with very minor changes. Okay, you get this add-on, you get that add-on, and so on. Make them look a little different, but by and large, you look at them and they go, "What? That's the same house." Erie had tons of these where I went to college. Anyways, these prefab housings was how we got everyone housed coming back. This is how we created the modern American dream. Well, the 20th century American dream. Now it's to be bought out by a major stock corporation like Google. But I digress. And so we created these massive prefab homes. The suburbs becomes a real thing. We get a major shift away from cities to the suburbs thanks to the automobile, thanks to roads and highways. Post-war world is the modern world until 2001, give or take. The most famous of these prefab towns is Levittown, and it just kind of becomes a shorthand for all of these. So you'll hear that people lived in Levittowns all over the place. There's only one real Levittown, but again, becomes a shorthand. We also get the baby boom. You've said, okay, boomers. Well, it refers specifically to a group. People born 1946 to 1964. I am a millennial, so if you ever said, okay, boomer to me, that's why I've looked at you in such shame. You're wrong. I'm a millennial. Give me my participation trophy and I'll move on. Well, anyway, the generation after the war, GIs come back and they start families, and you get this massive boom in the number of babies. Population increases a lot, and especially significant following the drop in the birth rate thanks to the Great Depression and the great loss of life that was World War II. So it is especially pronounced, and these are the people who are now retiring, and there's all sorts of issues with, well, okay, how do we pay for all this? If you've watched anything like Happy Days or Grease and you're like, there's no way that everyone wore those poodle skirts and all looked the same in the leather jackets. No, they absolutely did. We see something that is alien to us now. I mean, maybe you've seen it in certain groups, but it's reduced even from when I was your age. That we get a culture of assimilation, of sameness, that everyone wants to look the same. That if you're different, you're going to be made fun of, you're going to be ostracized, and it was a culture that more or less embraced that if you're going to be different, if you're going to be weird, you should be ostracized because you're being un-American above anything else. That you can't step out of line when it comes to any of these big things like if you're shunning the American way of life, you are shunning America, and therefore you must be supporting the communists. It's that simple at a basic psychological level. But everyone definitely fought to be the same. And bullying was, I don't want to say encouraged, but it certainly became part of culture. Those stereotypes of beating someone up and stealing their lunch money, that was real. That actually happened. So when you watch old TV or any TV set in this age, yeah, that's how it was. In fact, I got a short clip from a school publication about dress code, and I'm sure you will find it hilarious.
Many teenagers are as concerned as their parents with the public's conception of today's youth. These students are portraying what we consider bad taste in school attire and behavior.
Those are the violators.
This student is wearing an ankle bracelet, dungarees,
Dungarees are blue jeans.
and dropped earrings. This student is wearing an extremely tight skirt
Extremely
and
tight.
tight sweater. Open shirt, black jacket, dungarees are mentioned in the code as not proper school attire. This group is our ideal of the proper school attire and social behaviors of the Hicksville Junior High students.
See, that's what you're supposed to look like. Anything beyond that, and you're wrong. So all of you are violating dress code by and large. So be thankful for how far we've come. We also see a counterculture. That, okay, we have this mass assimilation. Well, there's also the people who refuse to drop into it. And we get two things that have become stereotypes now, but they actually existed, and they did look a lot like their stereotypes. When it comes to a counterculture today, I think the best one to think of is hipsters. Like, usually I'd put this out to the class and ask questions, but, well, here we are. Hipsters, rejecting things, rejecting technology, using their vinyl albums and doing things before they were cool. Well, counterculture really kind of starts here in the 50s. For the first time we get like a fully American culture, and so we get a counterculture. It starts with the Beats or Beatniks. These are beat poets, those, drumming on their bongos, telling poetry that doesn't make any sense. That's the Beats, man. And greasers, those people like Fonzie were real. Biker gangs started after World War II. Veterans who probably likely suffering some sort of PTSD wanted to be back in the environment of the military, kind of missed their friends, missed the adrenaline of certain situations, formed biker gangs right after the war. Well, this is a lot of their kids or their neighbors' kids seeing this and kind of pulling some of that look and some of that environment, some of that way of life into their lives. These are two totally real things. But what really stuck in the craw of everyone is rock and roll. That music changed and everything was horrific and terrible. How dare people create this? There is all sorts of racism involved, saying this is some product of African Americans trying to bring down white culture. There's some stuff from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that I meant to put in this, but well, oh well. This is some horrific, terrible thing. This is stuff where if I had shown anything related to this in school in the 50s, I would be fired immediately. I would be put to task for linking any of this stuff. How dare I? And the leader of this was Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley was a young singer from the South. His parents were sharecroppers. He had escaped all of that. And he was known for his swinging, gyrating hips. Things that I'm sure you all look at and go, what's wrong with that? But back then, he was enemy number one. Everyone thought that he was corrupting the youth. You hear the screams from the crowd, and they're like, oh my goodness, what are they doing to our children? This is wrong. You still see some of this today with like anti-video game stuff, but it's nothing on the level we saw in the 50s. And so, unfortunately, I'm going to have to do this with links because, well, I can't just put a song in the middle of this and expect not to be taken down. So I am going to have a link in the rest of the classroom stuff. Pause this, go back, look at Elvis Presley's You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog. So initially, Elvis was kept off of television because he was so quote-unquote raunchy with his swinging hips. How dare he? Eventually, it came to televisions like, look, he's too popular. We can't just keep ignoring him. And the Ed Sullivan Show, which was the hit show at the time, everyone watched Ed Sullivan. I mean, you only had 3 channels. You didn't have that many options. But, I mean, like all the Tide shows, all the late shows, like combined, that's Ed Sullivan. So that They brought Elvis on to perform. Elvis performs, and in order to keep his hips at a minimum, they gave him an overlarge coat to try and hide his hip movements. And even as you watch the video I have linked, I want you to pay attention to how quickly the camera cuts away and how the camera cuts away, so they try and show as little of that as possible. Pay attention to the camera work here, trying to minimize that. In other later broadcasts, they would have him literally singing to a hound dog, so any kind of innuendo is, no, look, he's singing to a dog. That's how it is. Bigger coats, filming from just the waist up. Like, there's a lot of stuff that just gets utterly ridiculous by today's standards. But also at home, the problems of communism. In the 1950s, the communist paranoia, Red Scares, are at an all-time high, something unlike anything we've ever seen. We formed the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC. They subpoena those suspected of communist activity. We'll talk a little bit more about them. We'll have a video, a link to them. And probably the biggest star from all of this is Richard Nixon, who is down there at the right. Probably the biggest thing that came out of this was actually real is Alger Hiss is a convicted spy and accused communist from the State Department who was selling secrets to the Russians. Beyond just recognizing his name, I don't know why there's any kind of real big deal. I mean, maybe it helped fan the flames of, well, look, we got one, out of so many who didn't. Joe McCarthy is the heart of this, and I put the two videos together, one after the other, to go and watch, because he is the center of all of this, even if he isn't necessarily HUAC. He is a senator from Wisconsin, attracted the attention in 1950 when he said that he has a list of 205 communists in the State Department. He would never produce a single name of a communist in government. But that did not stop him from accusing people of having people subpoenaed, of trying to force people to admit that they were communists, and if they didn't, they were still blackballed just because they were accused or they refused. How dare they? Or they named names and they named others, and lots of people were falsely imprisoned, lost their livelihoods. Hollywood was especially affected by this, where they went after a number of actors and directors saying that they had communist sympathies, and many of them would never work again in acting. He remains in the news for years, accusing people of crimes. People really like to compare this time to the Salem witch trials, and I would not be shocked if there was an essay somewhere comparing the two directly. That you get a lot of people accused falsely, people who refuse to testify, or they never really find things anyways, and their lives are forever changed regardless of the facts. Definitely pay attention to that kind of correlation. McCarthy's downfall would happen when he accuses the army of housing communists. This is where he finally went too far, and the key line in one of these depositions, he is questioning a witness in the army, and the young officer says, "Have you no sense of decency, sir?" That these people have taken oaths, they are fighting and dying, their friends are dying for this country, and he accuses them of being communist as we go and fight communists. And so McCarthy is more or less disgraced, and he falls out of the public picture, and I believe he died shortly thereafter. So, two attached videos, both from History Channel. Sum it up very quickly so we can move on. Some specific things that the videos don't talk about is the Hollywood 10. HUAC targeted Hollywood. I kind of mentioned that. In October 1947, so this is before McCarthy, 40 movie industry people are subpoenaed. Reputations could be ruined, careers ended. Some look for leniency, to cooperate. Some invoke the Fifth Amendment, the right not to incriminate oneself, and that makes them look guilty. But 10 writers would fight back to show that the committee is unconstitutional. All 10 would be found in contempt of Congress. They would serve 1 year in prison, a $1,000 fine, and none of them would ever work in Hollywood again. But they stood up. There's that. So let us make it very clear that paranoia defines the Cold War, that's really what it is. Okay, so it's an arms race. Okay, so there's these proxy wars. But in reality, it's fear. All fear and paranoia of the war. So let's shift back to international relations and talk about what's happening in the Soviet Union so that we better understand what's happening with us. So Joseph Stalin dies of natural causes in 1953. And if you don't know the story, let me tell it to you because I think it's great. So Joseph Stalin decided that he liked to have fun with his guards and the people in charge of things. It was one way to try and keep himself busy. And one of those games he liked to play is that he would tell the guards outside his room that he's sleeping. He is not to be bothered. And no matter what, do not bother him no matter what. And so in the middle of the night, Stalin would wake up and he would call for his guards, and the guards would rush in, and then he would shoot them and say, I told you not to bother me, no matter what. So in 1953, Stalin suffers a heart attack in his sleep, and he is yelling for his guards, and his guards are like, no, I'm not falling for that again. And so he dies because of his own games. They wake up, in the morning, they go in, and he is a corpse on the floor, and all sorts of rigmarole happen, trying to pick who's going to be the successor, because Stalin deliberately didn't want anyone to be rivaling his power. He killed just about everybody who could possibly rival his power. If you really want a good look, The Death of Stalin is a fantastic movie that is more or less accurate, and it features, what all happened. Rather recent, just came out less than 5 years ago. Anyways, in the end, Nikita Khrushchev will be the one who takes power. He is a man from the Ukraine who grew up a farm boy. He begins Stalinization. The first meeting he has with the Soviet is that Stalin has done terrible things, and we need to be able to admit that. And everyone's just like, we can say that now? And so he begins de-Stalinization, show the West why the Soviet Union is okay. Coexistence is Khrushchev's big plan. But he also knows you can't be walked on. The Soviet Union will not be vassals to the United States. They will not be inferior to the United States. But they should coexist. Khrushchev, why I love him so much. He is known for his boisterous speeches and pounding his desk and he many moments, and believe me, I looked for this footage. It does not exist. He actually takes off his shoe and smacks it on the podium to rival the Secretary General's gavel, and ends up storming out in all of this in the middle of the United Nations. A man after my own heart. He makes a speech saying to the U.S. that we will bury you. Now, here in the United States, we take that as, he's going to kill us. In Europe, or anyone from a different language set might realize that, he's saying that we will be at your funeral. That is definitely the Russian meaning of that term, that we will be among the ones to bury you at your funeral when you die of natural causes. But that misunderstanding more or less defines East-West relations under Khrushchev. In 1953, Khrushchev will tour the United States, debating the merits of communism, why the USSR is not so bad. Basically, Eisenhower, in talking to him, goes, well, maybe you should visit us and see that we're not so bad sometime. And Khrushchev goes, yeah, let's do it. And Eisenhower's kind of like, oh, crap, what did I just commit to? So, in a bunch of details you don't need to know, but I love these stories. They're fantastic. In coming to America, Khrushchev will get into an argument with Eisenhower's vice president, Richard Nixon, in a model kitchen at an expo showing the latest technologies of the day. I got pictures. Is thoroughly offended when he's not allowed into Disneyland. So things were ridiculous. People followed Khrushchev like he was a Kardashian. And then some. Reporters were climbing through yards and destroying fences and hedges, trying to keep up with the motorcade as he would go through neighborhoods or walk through just to get the pictures they wanted. It's utterly ridiculous. And so when someone threw a tomato at Khrushchev's car and it landed on the windshield, as cartoonish as you can imagine, but Khrushchev is a giant cartoon, and I love it, that Eisenhower says that, well, we can't guarantee your safety to go to Disneyland. And Khrushchev is furious that he's not going to be allowed to. I thought this was America, land of freedom. You're telling me I can't go to Disneyland? I want to see the mouse. No, he's not allowed. He has meals with Hollywood celebrities. He's on every talk show in the country. The press is literally getting into fights because they're destroying property, and these civilians are like, you can't do that. And he has an hours-long conversation with a farmer about corn. Hold on. Let's look at some pictures. I mean, this is Khrushchev with a chicken. I don't know why. This is at that kitchen expo, and Nixon starts talking about how great American technology is. Look at our washing machines and refrigerators. And Khrushchev's like, we have washing machines and refrigerators. And Nixon's like, no, we got better stuff. And this gets to an actual, like, pointing the finger at the chest, getting in people's faces before people pull them apart. You nearly have a brawl between the premier of the Soviet Union and the vice president of the United States. Love it. But I mean, he autograph seekers, everyone loves him. I have no idea what the context of this picture is, but I think it's fantastic. Just look at him. And my favorite picture in history, which you might have noticed above my desk, is this photo that ends up on the front cover of Life magazine, where that is the man who leads the Soviet Union, who has his finger on the button for destroying the world with nuclear weapons, the man who starts the Cuban Missile Crisis, and there he is super excited about corn. Corn. Well, it turns out in one of these things that he's at a farm expo, and he meets some guy who had sold corn to Russia. And Khrushchev knows all about this, being a guy from Ukraine who had grown up around corn. And they end up having a 3-hour conversation. I can only imagine what that did to everyone's scheduling plans. A 3-hour conversation about corn between the premier of the Soviet Union and some random farmer from Iowa. Love it. But it's not all good. Like most fun characters, there is a dark side. In 1956, anti-communist protests in Poland lead to violence. Khrushchev's response? To crush them with tanks. 1956, there's an anti-Soviet uprising in Hungary, and he crushes them with tanks. And then the U-2 spy plane that we had been flying, a super high-level, complicated airplane, way above where we thought the Soviets could ever hit us. We literally said it's above missile range. And so we're doing these overflights over the Soviet Union, photographing important installations, spying. Well, we underestimated the Soviets, and a U-2 spy plane is shot down. And the pilot, Francis Gary Powers, is supposed to take a cyanide capsule away. Okay, so actually it was inside a silver dollar, and there's a needle covered in cyanide. He was supposed to stick himself, and then he'd die instantly. He decided not to do that, and so he was captured, and the U-2 plane wreckage was captured. And so there's this massive international incident of how dare the U.S. spy on them. But look, the Soviets took him down anyways, and it ends up he is traded for another spy whose name is Abel Archer. I feel like it's a nuclear test. Anyways, if you really want the full in-depth look, there's a recent movie starring Tom Hanks called Bridge of Spies that is also really well done. So if you want more of this story, you can go. But let's put it this way. This put us really close to nuclear war over an American being shot down over the Soviet Union while spying. But the biggest crisis was East Berlin and West Berlin. People are not allowed to leave East Germany, and people are trying to get into West Berlin, and then they fly to West Germany, and then anywhere in the world. That people are leaving East Berlin, in East Germany, which is communist, and you have this bustling hub of capitalism that everyone has poured all sorts of money into to be the best-looking West Germany that anyone can imagine. So the solution is building the Berlin Wall. And the Berlin Wall is not just a single wall. It is actually a complex of walls that completely surrounds West Berlin. People are like, well, why didn't they go around? Literally surrounds West Berlin, and West Berlin is an island within East Germany. And this cut through right through the middle of streets. This cut through the outsides of buildings. You brick up the windows, and you're now the wall. This separated families. This was done nearly overnight. In August of 1961, that nearly overnight we get the barricade, the protective barricade, and we get these checkpoints that are made so that you can still have people who are allowed to transport back and forth, diplomats and things. But these checkpoints are flashpoints for where we figured World War III would start. So when I talk about this being a complex, I mean there's walls, and then there's stakes, and you get cables and barbed wire and bunkers and patrols and ditches so you can't just drive across it. Later on you would get landmines. You would get automatic machine guns. I don't know how that works, but they did it. They did it with communist technology. And so this was extremely difficult to get across. that thousands of people would be hurt or killed trying to leave East Berlin. And I am attaching a video. Okay, so the presentation of it is a little cheesy. But it's a top 8 people who escaped, and it tells some of those stories. But what I like most is in between the stories, it tells a lot of pieces that I have already gone over, trying to tie it all together into, okay, this is what the wall is. And it will give you a brief look at, well, how it ends. This includes a checkpoint Charlie, which was where the American diplomats were supposed to use. This was the American checkpoint. This was not for any German nationals. For about a week, we get Russian tanks and American tanks staring at each other across this checkpoint, this road across the Berlin Wall, waiting for the other side to fire. That if World War III happened, it likely would start in Berlin. Also under Eisenhower, we get the space age. In October 4th, 1957, the first ever thing made by mankind leaves the atmosphere. Sputnik 1 would be our first satellite, and Sputnik means traveling companion. Now, Sputnik is only there to test radio waves. It was something that they told every radio operator, hey, if you want to listen in, you can listen to it. And it was just a beeping, just to show that radio waves do travel in space. But it also was a tremendous impact that, hey, we can go beyond the planet for the first time. That this is the start of a whole new era. And you imagine how much technology is going through the atmosphere up to space and back down, how much of this internet is being transported that way. Our lives are based around space-based operations, and we don't even give it much thought anymore. It's mind-blowing how integrated it is to everything that we just kind of forget. But this is also a panic moment for the U.S. And when I said that Ike was not even beloved by the end of his term, it's because of Sputnik. So a couple big things. And I have videos to link to this that I think explain it better, but I'm still going to explain it a little anyways. Sputnik does a couple things. First off, scientifically blows the minds of everyone. This is a moment that was just truly off the charts. All the science fiction that was really, really popular in the early 50s is now somewhat real, that we can get to space. And people are already thinking about going to the moon and Mars and beyond, that this is the future, that we are now moving towards the next age of humanity. We are stepping beyond our cradle of Earth. The other thing is that you have something from your enemy floating over your head every 90 minutes, which is how long it took Sputnik to orbit the Earth. And the best analogy I've seen to this is saying that what if China invented time travel? Think about that. Oh, that's really amazing. Time travel, that is something above and beyond. But it's China. What are they going to do? Are they going to erase us from ever existing? Like, how is this going to work? What can be done? Or what are they going to do with that technology? In the same way that with the Soviets, if they can put a Sputnik over our heads, why can't they put a bomb over our heads? Why can't they put a missile that could drop down at any point? There is a major shift in fear that all of this nuclear stuff, okay, it was there, but we can shoot down their bombers. Well, now they're over our heads directly, floating over our cities. What does that mean for us? And so Eisenhower, his popularity tanks, because how could you let this happen? We didn't think the Russians could make a proper refrigerator, and here they are launching things into space. How did this happen? How did we get caught flat-footed? How did America lose in this? Now, there have been some theories going back saying that Eisenhower wasn't sure that if we did launch a satellite, which we probably could have, that if we did, what happens when we fly over the Soviet Union? Would they freak out and launch missiles on us? Would they launch a nuclear attack? So Sputnik answers that. Well, if Sputnik's going to fly over our country, that means we can fly over their country. And Ike wanted an answer on that before he approved any kind of move on. I don't know how true that actually is, but it does give Eisenhower a little bit of credit in this whole situation, which he usually takes a major hit. The Russians follow with the first animal in space. Sputnik 2 includes at the bottom, below the beach ball there, is a chamber for a stray dog named Laika. They sent it up with a camera just to find out whether or not it could survive in space. Can living things exist in zero gravity outside the atmosphere? Yes, it can. However, the cooling system on the Sputnik failed within 3 hours, and the dog would die from heat exhaustion and never be brought back down. Sad. 1958, we would send up our first satellite, Explorer 1, which you can see being held aloft by some scientists there. It would explore the Van Allen belts, the magnetic fields that protect this planet from solar rays. All of our abilities were from Nazi scientists. We set up Project Paperclip, yes, as in the Office of Pi Project Paperclip, to steal as many scientists as we could and take them back to the United States and let them work on rocketry. The Soviets did the same thing. It was a race of our Nazis versus their Nazis. Werner von Braun was not the greatest Nazis, though he was pivotal in creating the V-2 missile, which would rain down terror on London during the war. He wanted to build a space station. He wanted to go to space. He wanted space exploration, and he was happy to take funding from whoever would give it to him. At that point, it was the Nazis, and some have said that he wasted so much Nazi money on his ideas that he helped shorten the war. But that's up to you. A Nazi is a Nazi. But the thing is, without Werner von Braun, we do not get to the moon. His expertise allowed us to build rocket engines big enough to actually make it to the moon. And rocket engine size is literally what puts us ahead of the Soviets in reaching the moon. And we will talk about that later on. So, as I said, Eisenhower in the space race takes a major popularity hit because of this breach of security, but he would found NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, in 1958. It would replace the NACA as any ability to create rockets, and NASA has been serving us ever since. As president, Eisenhower said that in all those things which deal with people, be liberal, be human. In all those things that deal with people's money or the economy or their form of government, be conservative. Ike was a true moderate, maybe the last true moderate, and last truly beloved president. Like I said, even that didn't end all that well. But everyone did like Ike. He insisted on balancing the federal budget to guard against creeping socialism. Again, containment, very important. He wanted to end Truman's military buildup, and in his closing speech, he talks about the military-industrial complex, that we are going to keep spending on the military, and the military is going to tell us to keep spending on the military, and eventually all of this is going to lead us into places we don't want to be, like a nuclear war, or that we're in countries we shouldn't be because military contractors are telling us that we ought to spend. It's perhaps his most lasting legacy is that warning, though kind of like George Washington saying that we shouldn't be involved in foreign affairs, none of it actually holds up. One thing definitely against Ike as president was Operation Wetback. Yeah, it's pretty racist. Between 300,000 and 1.3 million Mexican immigrants, the numbers are not clear, are removed using military tactics in 1953. Not all of them were here illegally. Some were here fully illegally. The thing is that Mexico actually encouraged this. Between 1942 and 1964, we had the Bracero program that encouraged migrant workers to come to the U.S., and Mexico was actually experiencing worker shortages. And so Mexico's like, hey, can you get some of those people to come back? And like all American things, we overdid it a bit and definitely went a bit too far with it all. Finally, one last thing, and Eisenhower's certainly his greatest contribution to our country is the Interstate Highway Act of 1956, which was $27 billion to create highways. Eisenhower saw the Autobahn in Germany, and he saw the military potential of it. And before the war, so war games are something that happen all the time. The military and Pentagon think tanks, who knows, some of your parents, participate in gaming situations to simulate possibilities, like having a global pandemic. And so one of these things was, okay, if there's an invasion of the United States, how would you do it? And General Patton was one of the big ones using cars and trucks to move things. He said an invasion of the New Orleans, working up the Mississippi, and all these things that we took under advisement and said, okay, let's make sure we shore that up. Well, in one of those exercises, Eisenhower was to take a group of trucks from coast to coast, Boston all the way to California. Okay, how long would something like that take before the highways? You wouldn't think that much, and usually I solicit answers, and I never get anywhere close. It took 61 days to cross the country in trucks. Eisenhower saw that as a major problem, that if we had gotten invaded on the West Coast, nothing we have on the East Coast could possibly get there in time, and vice versa. That this country needed a network of roads to connect everything. And the only way to do that was to build highways like Germany's Autobahn. So whenever you see those blue interstate shields like I-66, 495, or 95, you can thank Dwight David Eisenhower as the reason for why those exist. Say what you will about it, but none of the capitalism that we enjoy today would be possible without the ability to move so much stuff across this country so quickly, from factories onto the trucks to where they need to go. And God willing, they will all bring us toilet paper very, very soon. All right, I was going to cover Ike and Kennedy, but this has taken far too long, so I'm going to end it here. This is Eisenhower as president, the full story in this Quarantine Optional.